Hey everybody, Plushie here. So today we're going to end the Summer 7 banner breakdown series with the final banner that I haven't made a video on, which is of course the second banner featuring Summer Ibuki and Summer Erice. This is probably one of the most hyped up banners, in a very long time because of how strong Summer Ibuki is, so I bet you guys are pretty excited about it. So without further ado, let's get into today's banner breakdown on Summer Ibuki. Summer Ibuki is an AoE Arts Berserker farmer / DPS. Summer Ibuki is known to be one of the best AoE Arts units ever made, and a large part owing to her Berserker class, her decent MP refund, her huge battery, her very high attack stat, and her great coverage in her anti-earth anti-trait. Her frailty as a berserker and a lack of any hard survival skills is often not that big of an issue, as she belongs in the arts card type, meaning that the very defensive Castoria will usually have her back in terms of, protecting her. Summer Ibuki is one of the best farming units to ever exist. Her damage is extremely decent compared to some of her other older competitors, as she is a berserker with a very high attack stat, only outdone by the recently MP upgraded Summer Musashi. Obviously, her damage is not going to be as great compared to some of the other competition in the Avenger or Ruler class if you're fighting against Berserkers, but in most cases, her damage is extremely good, and even if you're farming Berserkers with Ibuki, it's not like she doesn't do good damage anyway. So as you can see here, this is a chart that has some brief comparisons that I did before during my numerous AoE Arts units hot take videos, and Ibuki definitely looks very good, even very long into the future compared to some of the most modern AoE Arts loopers, such as Summer Melusine. Once again, it is also very easy for her to hit her anti-earth anti-trait, as earth is one of the most widely distributed traits among servants and non-servants alike, allowing her to push her damage even more under certain circumstances. Due to her versatile skill set, Summer Ibuki is able to fit into many different kinds of farming teams. Single core looping teams with double Castoria plug Oberon is of course the most straightforward, and she performs very well in it, but due to her big battery and her ability to buff her teammates with her charisma on her skill 1 and potentially targetable buster / arts buff on her skill 2, she actually fits very well into a multi-core setup where you add a single target unit for better damage instead of one of your meta supports. Summer Ibuki can even serve the role of a pure support in farming, as she's one of the cooldown reduction units outside of Koenska of Light that has a decent amount of offensive buffs. 20% attack up from skill 1 and 30% buster / arts buff on the skill 2. Usually this only benefits Arcuate specifically. If you want to loop with Arcuate with Black Grail and Double Koyan Light, now you can plug in Summer Ibuki instead of using Atlas for a bit of extra damage, but it's a bit of a fringe use case. There are also other cases where you can combo her with someone like Tonaliko, whose skill 3 very much requires cooldown reductions to activate, but both of these aren't like super significant cases in my opinion, but it's great to know that she also has this kind of utility. Berserker as a class is also usually just the best for farming overall, as it is extremely rare for the game to include foreigner servants in a 90++ node to try to wall them, so Summer Ibuki in 99% of the cases is going to be hitting 1.5 times anti-class. As I mentioned before, this allows her to have a lot higher of an average damage for looping compared to other neutral AoE Arts options such as Avengers and Rulers alike. The only two major examples I can remember that actually try to include foreigners to stop Berserkers is the Koyan Dark in the first rotation of Morgenfest, which is on wave 2, so her HP isn't that high, so some people still brute force through her anyways with someone like Ibuki. And also, of course, the currently ongoing 90++ that features Voyager, which has like 770,000 HP on the final wave at the end boss, then yeah, okay, of course, this boss completely walls Summer Ibuki for farming. However, I really think being walled once in the span of 2 years is pretty good track record, and even then you can still do stuff such as include a single target to deal with the foreigner and still include Ibuki as the wave clear that kills everything else in the node. So yeah, I don't think these are great arguments against Summer Ibuki's strength in terms of farming. Summer Ibuki is not just a great farmer, however, she's also an amazing DPS for challenging content. Everything that made her great as a farmer also doubles as benefits that help her tear through most challenge quests with ease just by spamming her MP with Castoria. However, on top of those great features, Summer Ibuki also has other tools that makes her even more valuable in a challenge quest or non-farming context. Summer Ibuki has a surprisingly complete critical damage sentry skill set, despite being an arts AoE unit that usually struggles to generate stars because she's an arts unit, and also usually struggles to get stars to crit because she's a berserker with extremely low star weight. Both of these problems are fixed with her skill 3. Summer Ibuki's skill 3 both generates 10 stars per turn, as well as gives her a massive 5000% star absorb up for 3 turns. This is a bread and butter skill that allows her to crit with relative ease, and despite being in an arts team, being a berserker that has 2 buster cards, a buster steroid on skill 2 and her passive, which combines into a 44% total buster up, and even a 30% crit up for 3 turns on her skill 1, makes her crit damage surprisingly devastating on top of her already really good MP damage. Summer Ibuki, of course, also has that targetable cooldown reduction effect on her skill 2, which usually she does use on herself, making her effective cooldown across her entire skill set only 5 turns, which is really overtuned considering how powerful each of her skills are. And the fact that it is targetable, you can of course also use it in a pinch on one of your meta supports, for example, if you need emergency defense against strong enemy attacks or even the enemy MP, and you don't have Castoria's MP available, you can simply use this cooldown reduction on Castoria and potentially allow her to get her MP back by using her own battery effects, or at the very least shield the most frail Ibuki with her skill 3, which contains an invul skill. And of course, the entire party's cooldown can get even shorter if you decide to pair your arts team with Tamamo no Mai, because of course we're not just talking about farming, we're talking about challenge quests, and in that kind of context, Tamamo is a great partner for this team. And once again, because this skill is targetable and she has quite a bit of nice steroids in her entire kit that can help other people, such as the charisma and the crit up on her skill 1 and the 30% buster and arts double card type up on her skill 2, you can also use her as a fringe support for cooldown reduction, just similarly to how she functions in farming as a niche support. And I've definitely seen people use her with servants such as Cool Khan in order to abuse her extremely overpowered skills to have them double stack and have extremely short downtime, even though this is usually more of a fringe use case and mostly for like min-turn content that not everyone really likes to do all the time. But having the potential to do something like this also gives Ibuki a little bit of additional value. And of course, Summer Ibuki's MP also has some utility other than, of course, doing great anti-earth damage that scales with overcharge. The MP also removes all defensive buffs prior to it doing damage, allowing Ibuki to ignore certain boss gimmicks. Now, I do understand most of the super major defensive buffs on each boss are unremovable usually, but still having this effect is really nice against certain enemies, especially enemies that inherently have their skill sets that contain defensive effects, and usually those are not going to be boxed and Ibuki will be able to ignore them. So really nice effect to have on an AoE in particular. And also the MP spams a 20% crit rate down for 3 turns on all enemies whenever she MPs. And if you don't know how crit rate functions, as I mentioned a little bit in some previous videos, most enemies have a base crit rate of 20% or lower, and crit rates are calculated additively. So essentially giving them a 20% crit rate down means that if they don't have any crit rate boost skills, they just can't crit Ibuki, which of course protects her from getting killed by a straight crit during the downtime of Castoria's MP. And of course, this effect is a 3-turn effect, and Summer Ibuki can loop her MP very easily, so you can potentially get this even up to 40% or 60% crit rate down, and by that time, even if the opponent has some kind of crit rate boosting skill, they're not gonna be able to crit you most of the time anyway. So really good defensive effect that people often overlook on Summer Ibuki, and you can especially show how powerful this is by pairing your Ibuki and Castoria duo with Erice, who can eliminate her Berserker class disadvantage. So now I'm going to briefly get into my personal pros and cons for Summer Ibuki. So Summer Ibuki has big batteries, big damage, big refund, and is a member of the Berserker class and has anti-earth, anti-trade coverage, giving her insane amounts of MP loopage as well as damage, and making her one of the best AoE arts units ever released in the game. She has extremely versatile team comps for both single core and multi-core farming, even to this day in JP, making your investment very worth your buck. She's also a very solid challenge quest DPS, not just because of all of the good features that make her a good farmer, but also additional effects such as her ability to crit despite being an arts berserker, and also her ability to remove defensive buffs before damage, which allows her to ignore certain boss gimmicks. And finally, she is of the arts card type, meaning that she works very well with Castoria and other powerful arts supports, which basically kind of mitigates her frailty as a weakness in challenging content. So she is very close to being one of those the only DPS you'll ever need kind of units, where if you have a very strong Summer Ibuki, you'll find yourself often not needing any other unit in the game in order to do everything. And in terms of the cons, honestly, in a vacuum, Summer Ibuki doesn't have many. Mainly the cons come from the fact that there are so many AoE arts units in the game, especially considering quote-unquote universal loopers, such as neutral classes like Avengers, Rulers, or other Berserkers. So if you already have, a character in mind that you want to invest in the future, for example, Summer Melusine, or if you already have a character highly invested in this archetype, then you might have to sort of match the same amount of investment on your Summer Ibuki to feel like she's gonna be an upgrade, and even then they're gonna be performing very similar jobs, so you might feel like it's a little bit of a redundancy in your roster. And also at the end of the day, Summer Ibuki is still an AoE DPS farmer, looper, however you want to call her, so her MP level is going to be a little bit more important, and if you can only afford MP1, I'm not saying she's unusable at MP1, but she definitely appreciates MP2 a lot more compared to the other two Summer Servants, which are mainly going to be used as supports. And finally, she has uneven butt cheeks in her final ascension, so that's clearly a pretty big con. But of course, Summer Ibuki is not the only servant we need to talk about today. We also have to briefly mention the 4-star featured on the same banner with her, which is of course Summer Erice. Summer Erice is a single target arts Avenger boss killer and is part of the trifecta of 3 very powerful single target arts universal DPSs that is of the 4-star rarity. She prides herself in doing massive amounts of MP damage because of her universal anti-curse anti-trait on her MP, as well as her anti-servant power mod, which covers a lot of enemies. Summer Erice usually is going to be treated as a hyper-offensive boss killer that focuses on spamming her MP, and her kit very much plays into that playstyle. Her first skill does have a little bit of extra survival in the form of a 2x 3-turn evade, but it also comes with a 3-turn art sub, which of course helps her MP damage as well as her MP gain from her arts cards. Her second skill is quite interesting. It's a 30 MP battery, and it also applies curse to the enemy, which activates her MP's anti-trait, but it also has a taunt effect as well as a 3-turn buff that allows her to grant a 3-turn 10% defense down on the enemy whenever they attack her. So this skill actually has quite a bit of special utility. It's obviously meant to be comboed with her skill 1, so she can take 2 free hits while debuffing the enemy, but also because she's an art servant, you can easily combo this with Castoria's skill 3 instead to guarantee that she doesn't take any damage regardless of how many actions the enemy has during her taunt turn. Of course, you can also do it with something like Castoria's Solemn Defense and get it up to Overcharge 3 or above to achieve a similar result. This skill also helps with Summer Erice's MP gain because she doesn't have that many ways to crit, so part of her MP regeneration has to be a combination of her arts cards and taking hits. And because she's an Avenger, she can take advantage of this quite well, since Avengers get more MP gain from taking hits. And finally, her third skill is a insta-death chance up, which usually doesn't come into play because usually she's killing bosses, and a 3-turn 35% crit up, as well as anti-servant power mod. So the 35% anti-servant power mod is obviously pretty nice to bolster her MP damage even further, but the crit up is unfortunately very hard to utilize, considering she's an Arts Avenger and she doesn't have anything in her kit that generates stars or help her absorb stars. She's not going to be critting very often. Her MP is also extremely simple. It has a chance to insta-kill, so it combos with her third skill's insta-kill up effect, but it's usually not very important. But it also, of course, deals anti-curse damage by 150%, which is kind of a shame that it doesn't scale with overcharge like most other anti-traits. I guess it's because it's so universal they want to nerf it a little bit, but honestly I think she definitely could have had it scale with overcharge and become an even more powerful unit. And the overcharge is very unfortunately a pretty lame one. It's a arts up for 1 turn before the MP does damage, and it scales pretty badly from 10% all the way up to only 30%. Summer Erice certainly has seen some fringe uses in farming as an insta-kill user against high HP bronze enemies, but there's certainly better units for that kind of job. For example, Domon, so she's not very much used, and also she doesn't really loop her MP that easily in a farming context because she very often needs to rely on taking hits from the enemy as well as using her own face cards, and her 30 battery is quite puny. And then finally, if you want to use her MP multiple times in a farming node, you will have to get some kind of card RNG to apply Curse on one of them because she only has 1 skill in her set that actually applies Curse. So overall, she's not a great farmer, but she is a very good boss killer. She particularly shines against big singular bosses that appear very common during Super Recollection quests. So as you can see here where I'm showing all of these clips, and maybe you search on YouTube, you can see other people doing it. She is a pretty prominent DPS being used during Super Recollection quests, and you can see her just blow past millions upon millions of HP on these seemingly ridiculous bosses with relative ease. Summer Erice is of course not without her flaws. The most glaring weakness is of course her susceptibility to any form of debuff immunity. If the enemy is even just dot damage immune, she cannot apply the curse stack, therefore she cannot do special effective damage against them. And also Summer Erice has a very hard time trying to crit compared to some of her other competitions, so her MP gain relies on both her arts cards and taking hits from the enemy. Her Avenger passive certainly helps a bit in that second part, but it's always not that good of a feeling to have to rely on taking hits to get their MP back. And finally, Summer Erice faces pretty fierce competition in the universal single target arts DPS category. Even in the 4-star rarity, we have powerhouses such as Estrella, who had an MP upgrade and has an Invul Pierce tied to her MP now, which is more utility than Erice, and also at lower MP levels deals comparable damage to Summer Erice, despite Luvia not even hitting her anti-evil anti-trait because of that MP upgrade. We also have someone like Creamhild, because she also has a taunt, but it's more flexible. She can actually taunt someone else, but she also has a bigger battery and belongs in the Berserker class, so Creamhild very often has better damage, despite Erice having literally a universal anti-trait on her MP. And of course, if you want to go into the higher rarity of the SSRs, we have Vlad and Galatea as currently available options, and also even more powerful options coming up next year in the form of Kenshin, Castoria, and Draco, and all of them have more well-rounded kits that can handle more situations than Summer Erice, whose kit mostly just focuses on boosting her MP damage and helping her gain her MP back. So I'm not saying Summer Erice is like washed up or something, but I'm just trying to emphasize how much competition she's facing in this single target arts universal DPS archetype. Rest assured, Summer Erice is still extremely powerful despite her flaws, and She is also one of the best single target Avengers still, considering how little of them there exist. And you know, your most accessible option outside of Erice is going to be Lobo, and Erice is certainly a lot stronger than Lobo. So she's still going to be a very valuable asset to your roster. In terms of my personal pros and cons on Erice, for the pros, she's a great universal single target boss killer that rivals SSRs in terms of MP damage despite being a 4-star because of her universal anti-curse anti-trait as well as her anti-servant power mod. Erice also, because her being a 4-star, is quite a bit easier to get higher MP levels compared to her other SSR competitions, and even to this day she is still one of the best single target Avengers just due to how scarce they actually are. However, Summer Erice of course is not without any cons. Her main cons are the fact that she is very much shut down by any form of debuff immunity, especially dot immunity, and also Erice has quite a bit of trouble critting, so part of her MP generation relies on taking hits, which is never a great thing. And then finally, Summer Erice faces a lot of fierce competition in the single target arts category. Even in the 4-star rarity, we have really powerful competition such as Estrella and Creamhild, and of course in the 5-star category we have even more. So if you do have any of them at particularly high investment, Summer Erice might feel a little bit redundant sometimes, but still a very powerful unit nonetheless. So my final verdict for this banner is going to be a 4.5 out of 5. Summer Ibuki is simply too strong of a servant, and in my opinion is still the strongest AoE arts servant in the game currently. Ever since her release, every other AoE arts that has been released has been pitted against her to compare their performance, and usually people's reaction is, okay, well, they're not as good as Summer Ibuki, so why should I roll for them? A DPS that has denied everyone since her debut in that same archetype definitely deserves some kind of credit, and Summer Ibuki is exactly that. And even though throughout the years we have gotten some units that have come close, such as Summer Melusine or the post MP upgraded Summer Musashi, I still think as a overall AoE arts unit, considering how well-rounded she is in both farming and challenge quests, Summer Ibuki is still the best option. So if you really want to invest in a single AoE character in the game, Summer Ibuki is going to be one of the safest bets ever. And Summer Erice, despite having some glaring issues, is still one of the most powerful single target arts DPS nukes in the game. So definitely a great sort of bonus to Summer Ibuki's banner, and if you manage to get her to MP3 or even MP5, you're going to be using her to crush a couple of Super Recollection quests at the very least. And just having her in the back pocket as a ruler killer is also super nice. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and thank you guys so much for your support for this brand new banner breakdown series. And please let me know in the future if there are any series of banners that you're interested in having a video made on, because I'm not going to make this for every NA banner, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, if you guys want to see it, I will try to make it. I quite like the new format, and I'll see you guys in the next one.